No, I'm glad to be back. I don't like missing. I don't like not being here. So this morning I'm very excited to be back in one of my favorite places with most of my favorite people and doing something that I enjoy, a really good mountain life, which is doing this. So I appreciate everybody being here. It's good to see everybody. I had a comment I wanted to make and then it's gone. So if it comes back up, it was really funny. Everybody's going to laugh. But I guess I'll just make you guys laugh by saying I forgot it and it's not there anymore. So, but I'll start out. A question I want to ask is, does anybody in here, you can raise your hand, enjoy podcasts? Do? Got a few people in here. Has anybody ever been on a podcast? So Aaron and Andrew have been on a podcast. I had a first experience in my life this past week. I have a buddy who goes to church at a place in Hope. And him and somebody else from their congregation does a podcast every week. And a couple weeks ago, he reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to have you on our podcast. And I said, that'd be great. That sounds fun. And this past Thursday, I was on their podcast, and we recorded 2 episodes. The first episode was talking about, there's 3 of us, obviously. And the first episode was talking about how our individual, just basically the overview of our individual journeys with faith. And me, I've grown up in the church. I've grown up with in the faith my whole life. It's something that's been a part of my life since I was born. Same with my friend, who's the one who invited me on the podcast. He has been in the faith his whole life, had parents who brought him up knowing God. But the other person, the other individual on the podcast with us, is fairly new to Christ. About 3 years ago, I think, we were talking about it a little bit. He talked about his journey on how he was a type of atheist growing up and throughout school and high school and everything. And it got me to thinking on how just one event can change your life forever. And basically, a part of his story was him and the guy who invited me on the podcast. They were high school friends. And throughout high school, the guy who didn't grow up in the faith, I think it was just slightly after high school, getting into adulthood, just was finding life was not where he wanted it to be. Finding life, he's in a spot that he doesn't want to be. He doesn't find a whole lot of meaning in life. He doesn't understand really a good way and good outlook on life. And what he remembered was, my buddy who invited me on the podcast, he's like, he would talk about Jesus a lot. He would talk about this guy named Jesus a lot. And he was very, profound and talked about his faith quite a bit. So what he did is he talked to him and said, hey, I need a change in my life. I need something different. Will you help me with this? And shortly he invited him to church, and the very Sunday he went to church, he said, I need to be baptized. And they don't have a baptistry or anything. This is just a funny part of the story, and a great part of the story in general. He's like, I need to be baptized today. And they were like, well, we don't have a baptistry, and the only option we have is the lake across the street. It's January. And it just snowed the previous couple days. And so the lake was covered in ice, and he said, I need to do this today. He said, what if Jesus comes tomorrow? I need to do this today. So they went down there, they cleared out some ice, and they baptized him. It sounds really cold to me, but it's a beautiful thing that he was so passionate. He said, I have to do this today. And I, as we were talking about our faith journeys, I looked over at my buddy and I was like, all because of the way that he remembered that he talked about Jesus. He said, man, I am at a point in my life where I need something different. I don't like the way my life is going. I need a change in my life. And all it took was to him to look at him and say, hey, I need your help because I know who you've been talking about. I know who you wear on your chest. I know what kind of light you've been shining, and I want that in my life. And what I want to talk about today is how we can be that same light throughout our community. We can be the same light to people who don't know Jesus. And a reminder I want to put out there that's found in Luke 19 is, because I want to talk about us today. And what I would remind us is Jesus has already done his part. In Luke 19 verse 10, it shows us that Jesus came to save the world. And we just remembered the sacrifice that he made. He's already done his part. And today I want to focus on and talk about what does our part look like. So I'm going to talk about a few points here. Go ahead and turn over to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 16 here. And I'll read about verse 20. Yeah, Matthew chapter 5, 16 through 20. It says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of prophets. I have come to abolish them, I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until it is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least, I can't read this morning, sorry, of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now this passage is probably pretty familiar to those who were in our adult Bible study this morning. Ethan was overviewing this for us this morning. But really the point I want to get off to starting out is to remind us that we too are disciples. How often do you think about yourself as a disciple? How often do you remind yourself that, yeah, I have been called to be a disciple? We too are disciples called to bring even more people into the family of God. That's who we are to be. That's what this passage in Matthew is showing us. And we could turn over to chapter 9 as well, and it gives us another reminder similar to this. In chapter 9, starting in verse 35, it says, "And Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd." And here's the key verses here in verse 37. "Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord, to the harvest, to send out laborers to his harvest.'" Jesus is reminding us here, there's so much to do. Look at all the things there is to do within the kingdom, but we're lacking something. We're lacking workers. And he's talking to his fellow workers saying, hey, let's remind ourselves what it said in chapter 5 and apply it to chapter 9, saying, you guys are my disciples. Go out and make more disciples so that there's more work, so that the load of work can be done in an efficient manner. We too are disciples. And that's something that I look back on my life and I don't know if I've associated that term with myself enough. I don't think I have. I think sometimes I feel ashamed to associate myself with the disciples of Jesus. But as we've been going through this chosen study on Tuesday nights, those who've been participating, but you can read the Gospels in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and talking about the disciples of Jesus, you have to realize that these are just ordinary men. These men had normal jobs, these men had normal lives, and normal meaning they were human. And that's what I am too. I'm a normal guy who's trying to make my way through life. But if Jesus found a way to find these men worthy to be a part of his kingdom, to be a part of the work to be done on this earth, we too are just as worthy. God too has sought us out in the same way. So I want to remind us that we need to associate ourselves with the disciples. If we truly want to work in the kingdom, if we truly want to find others to bring to the kingdom and have a passion for that, remember, number one, that you are a disciple. And a disciple doesn't mean that you can be lazy. And a disciple doesn't mean you can let others do the work for you. A disciple means that you've been called to do the work of the kingdom. This is our purpose in life. This is who we have been made. This is why we have been made. To be disciples, to grow the kingdom, to show others this man is for real. Right? Remember that, number one. Point number two, let's turn over to Romans chapter 10. This is probably my favorite point of the morning. And I want to stress this a little bit more, I think. But let's start in Romans chapter 10. If I can find Romans. I never have issues finding passages on my own, and then I get here to preach, and it's like, I don't think they exist in the Bible. But I found it. So Romans chapter 10, we're going to start in verse 5. We're going to read this lengthy message. But this is Paul. And basically, I'm reading out of the ESV, and the heading before verse 5 says, the message of salvation to all. And recall what we've been talking about in Matthew chapter 5 with Ethan and talking about the kingdom of heaven. And we are talking about salvation in a sense. And that's kind of the goal of this morning, of salvation. But let's start in verse 5 of Romans chapter 10. For Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. But the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near to you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. And verse 8 is just giving us a reminder that if we are true about our faith, if we have true meaning about our faith, we will hold close to us in our hearts the words of Christ, the message of Christ, and who he is. Verse 9 goes on to say, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God is raised from the dead, you will be saved. Remember that too. Remember the message of salvation here, that there is salvation, there is meaning in proclaiming the name of the Lord. Because for some, it's hard to do that. For some, we're ashamed to go out and talk about our faith. But what this very passage is saying is you can be saved by the very way that you proclaim God, by the very way that you shine your light and you show him in your everyday life. Verse 10 says, For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call him. And verse 11 just repeats to say there's no shame in knowing Christ. There's no shame in the name of the Lord, and there's no shame in knowing who he is. How then, in verse 14, how then will they call on him who they not believed? And how are they to believe in him or of whom they've never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful of the feet of those who preach the good news. And by the way, verse 15 is why I enjoy teaching and preaching and sharing the gospel. And really, Romans chapter 10 anyways is a reason why I am very passionate about my faith. And why I wear it so boldly out in the community. After I read this passage, I don't know how many years ago, this is the reason I proclaim God as much as I do. But it says, how beautiful are the ones who preach. And that's just not meaning what I'm doing now. That's those who talk to people. That's those who wear the name of Christ. This preaching is involved in everything you do and sharing the name of the Lord. I'm sorry I'm stopping so much, but these are a lot of verses and I want to explain what's going on in my head. But it says in verse 16, continuing, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. But I ask, have they not heard? Indeed they have, for their voice has gone out to the earth, and their words to the end of the world. But I ask, did not Israel understand? First Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With foolish nation I will make you angry. Then Isaiah is so bold to say, I have been found by those who did not seek me. I have shown myself to those who did not ask for me. But of Israel he says, all day long I held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. So what is Romans chapter 10 telling us in the context of sharing the word of God and sharing our faith with other people? Well, starting in verse 13, it says, how are people to know if they've not heard? And think about that with anything in your life. I started a new job this week that I knew nothing about. And how was I to know anything about it unless I went through training? Unless I have other people showing me of it? Because before I started this job, it's like, what does all these things do? I have no idea. After week one, I have a better sense of what's going on. This is the same application. It's saying, how are people to know Jesus if they have not heard? And better yet, how are other people supposed to show people Jesus if they have not heard as well? I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't through me hearing and understanding and being taught by other people. That's just the reality of it. If my parents weren't faithful people, if I grew up in a household that did not know God, I wouldn't have known. There's no way I would have known. And then going on, like it says, but they have not all obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed, who has heard what he has heard from us. And so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Our very belief comes from hearing the word. Our very belief comes from those sharing it to us. So the point that I want to make is that we may very well be the reason of people knowing Jesus. We can be the difference in other people's lives. Just as these two guys I was on the podcast with, right? Guy over here who had not known Jesus his whole life, knew he needed a difference, but didn't know where to take that, needed guidance, needed help. And in the podcast, we talked about the importance and the beauty of the people of God, and how we all talked about our churches and say, hey, we appreciate our church so much for the very reason that God has given us a family that we can rely on, that we can grow with, and they can encourage us. But once again, I want you to understand that number one, you have been chosen to be called by God to be a disciple. And what do we do with that? Number two, we go change people's lives. We go make a difference in people's lives. We show others that there's a better way to live. We show others that there's hope in nothing else but the eternal glory of being in the presence of God. We talked about that this morning as well. The very presence, the very being of God, there's hope for. And I look at everyone in this room, and all of us have the ability to change people's lives, just as our lives have also been changed. Right? Recall a time maybe where you were low in faith or you had no faith. And think of your time now. How are you changed? How are you different? And how do you view the people who impacted you most in your life? We can make that same difference, each and every one of us. There's not a person in this room I would call and say, you can't do that. I promise, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. God has called all of us to be the difference in this world. And what that difference means is saving people's lives. We all can be heroes in a sense. And I don't want to say that boastfully. I don't want to say that like, oh, look at what we're doing. We're saving people's lives. But we are in a good way, and that is what God has called us to do. You guys know this is a broken world. You guys know that, it doesn't take long to find bad and darkness in this life. We can be the difference. We have been called to be the difference. Remember that. We have another reminder in Proverbs chapter 11. I'll read a short verse here in Proverbs chapter 11. Verse 30 says, "The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and whoever captures souls is wise." Whoever captures souls is wise. Coming from the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. Just as I had heard a story from someone who says, I didn't know what the meaning of life was. I didn't know how to find value in my life. I didn't know how to find value in myself, and I didn't know where to take it. Proverbs reminds us that the value in life is righteousness in God, and the wisdom that comes from the people who share that with other people. So remember that as well. We may be the only hope for others to understand who Jesus is and how to save their life. We may be that only hope of restorement in life. Let's go ahead and turn over to 2 Peter now. Second Peter chapter 3. I'll read a few verses here. Starting in let's start with verse 8, and I'll read to verse 13. 2 Peter 3, 8 through 13. "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day." I'm going to stop here for a minute and give you another story. When I was in theater in high school, I think I mentioned it in the Wednesday night talk one time, how we did these routines of worshiping God before we went on and performed. We would do that during rehearsals as well. We'd sing for a little bit and go in a circle and kind of worship together, just kind of keep our minds focused on what the main goal was. And we sing this song that mentioned this passage here in verse 8 when it says, but look at this one fact, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years 1 day. This is basically showing us, and I was reminded this of all the time, the value of the presence of God, the value of being with the Lord. And we think about how much could we do in 1,000 days? How much could we enjoy our life in 1,000 days? How much could we put in our life to enjoy it, to do good things? All the good things you can think of. And you can guarantee not a bad day in those 1,000 days. But 1 day with the Lord, this is just showing the importance of understanding that the presence of God is more important than anything we could ever imagine here on earth. So I just wanted to give a brief explanation on that. But going forward in verse 9, it says, "The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is impatient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away and roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth that works that are done on it will be exposed. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. But according to his promise, we are all waiting for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells." And before we talk about this passage, I want to turn over to Luke chapter 15 as well. And then I'll combine the two meanings and we'll talk about it a little bit. Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, I'll read the first 7 verses or so. Starting in verse 1, this is the parable of the lost sheep. I think a lot of us should be familiar. And we were probably all very familiar with the phrase that, the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night that we saw in the previous passage. But it starts in verse 1 saying, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' So he told them this parable. 'What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance.'" What do you understand from these two passages? Based on what we're talking about, what can we grab from these two passages? I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you how I feel. That God looks upon the earth. God looks at every single one he has created, and he has a heart for them. They mean something to him. At the end of the day, every person matters to God. So what should that mean to us? If every person, every being he has created matters to God, and it's important that they turn their life around to him, what does that mean to us? Well, I think every person should matter to us too. I think every single person should matter to us too. So everyone we run into, everyone that we cross paths with in our lives, they matter. They matter to us because why? They matter to our Heavenly Father. They're a being that he's created as well. We took a trip to Florida. We were in Disney World. And if you can imagine, there's lots of people there. And then when we came back, we went to a concert. Lots of people there. And I was telling my wife in Florida, I'm like, you know what's crazy? Because I think about it in my life here in Columbus too. I run into people every day that I have never seen before. And that I will probably never see again. Even here in Columbus. I go to Walmart, I see someone who lives in the same town as me, never see him again. That's just how it is. And very little do I remind myself that these precious souls have been also made by God. And that's a fall on me. But I remind myself of all these people I've seen. And when you go into public places, it's really easy to see a lot of things that probably wouldn't settle very well with God. But I remind myself now, I have to say that, hey, they are beings created as God. They are no more important than I am, and I am no more important than they are. And now that I've read this passage and made the sermon and listened to other people's stories, I see the importance in that. And I have to remind myself that more often. And then I have to remind myself, man, how's my light doing? How bright is my light shining? Am I doing a good job at showing people, hey, this is who I am. This is who I want to be. And I want to impact your life in the same way because my life is forever changed when I heard the good news, when I understood the good news, right? How well am I doing at that in life? After I got done with the podcast on Thursday, I went to work on Friday, and I was so giddy because I wanted to tell everybody about it. Because once again, I'm a talker. Everybody knows I like to talk. I'm a big people person. And I had a great time. We had a great experience recording these 2 episodes, and I have a lot of respect for these 2 guys. I just met the other guy. I'd been around him a little bit, but my buddy introduced me to him, and we had a great conversation. But I have a lot of respect for these 2. And I'll tell you the brief history of their podcast, too. I know I'm getting sidetracked, but it's a cool story. Right after the one was baptized, my buddy, I don't know why I'm not using names. I don't care. My buddy Quentin, he said, I kind of want to do a podcast. And he was just talking with Wyatt, and he had just recently become a part of the faith, and he's like, well, why don't we just do it? Why don't we just do it? And I was inspired by that when they told me about that on Thursday, because I was like, how many times do we say we want to do something and drag it out, right? How many times do we say something and say, hey, maybe we'll just get to that later? And I look at, a lot of us who have been in the faith for a very long time, and someone who is just very new. And to see the passion behind, hey, that would be a great idea. I know I'm new to this whole thing, but I'd love to talk about it. And I'd love to talk about it with you every week. And not only that, but I'd love to share it with other people. The second episode that we recorded was how technology and how the new day and age with Christianity has changed in the past 50 years or so. And we talked about the challenges it brings. We talked about COVID and how it started this new series of online streaming services, and how it was a blessing in the time to be able to be fed messages and to be able to be surrounded with the Word of God while we couldn't really be around people. But now 6 years removed, saying, hey, it's causing a little bit of an issue where people don't want to show up, and people just say, hey, I'll just watch it online and I should be good to go. We talked about that a little bit, but we talked about the good things that come with technology and social media and all these things, that there are some good things. Because we can sit there like we did on Thursday night and chat about our faith journeys and say, hey, this is what I've struggled with. Hey, this is where I come from. And we're recording that and we can share that with the world. Quentin gave me a statistic that said their podcast is pretty little, and that's okay. They do it because they enjoy it and they reach a handful of people. But they have had people in other countries watch their podcast and see what they talk about every week and see their faith journeys and what's on their mind recently. There's a lot of good that can come through that. But all that to say, all that little rant to say, is there's so much importance in how bright our light is shining. So much importance. And each and every one of you can make a difference. I promise you. And if you're struggling with that, you let me know. Or you let someone else know, because we can help you. We can grow this together. And I wanted this sermon this morning to kind of focus on the individual part, and I've talked about the individual part a lot, but that also goes for the church itself. We got 4 walls putting us in right now. The amount of power that holds in this room right now, that we can do together, that we can strive to accomplish together. The light that this church can shine into the community to bring more people to Jesus, to show people who Jesus is, and to show how their life can be changed. I want every part of that. And I want you too. I want you to have that passion to say, whatever we're doing here, I want to be a part of that. And I want all of us to keep thinking of different ways on how we can shine our light in the community. And how we can show people, hey, there's a better life out there. And what we're trying to do here is do that together. And what we're trying to do here is to grow each other and help each other and be there for each other. And I like what I'm seeing, but I want more of it. I want more passion. I want more zeal, and I don't think we could ever get enough of that. I think we need to do a better job sometimes on saying, if this is an idea we have, let's just do it. Sometimes we don't need to think about it. I'm a big Top Gun guy. Don't think, just do. Anybody heard that phrase before? Don't think, just do. Now, we need to be thoughtful, okay? We need to make sure we have reasoning behind what we do. But sometimes we need to say, hey, this is an idea, this is a great idea. Let's make sure we do this. Let's make sure we do this. I want to wrap up by Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. Romans chapter 1, I'll read both verse 16 and 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God, for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith, for faith, as is written, the righteous shall live by faith. I get a lot of inspiration from Paul. Get a lot of inspiration from the guy. Dude's smart. We have a great example in him on what it looks like to be a passionate, zealous Christian. And what I get from verse 16 of Romans chapter 1, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. We touched on it a little bit earlier on. But for this to be successful, and for us to do a better job at what I'm asking for us to do, the number one thing we always have to remind ourselves is to not be ashamed of the gospel. Wear it proudly. Don't be scared of what might happen. God's in control. There's a lot of bad things in life, and I recur a lot of bad things in my own life. But every time I looked to God, it made it better. Every time I looked to God, I was reminded that He took care of me. And that as sometimes it didn't go the way I planned, the most important thing was it's working out how God planned. Don't ever be ashamed of what this is. And don't ever be ashamed to speak it, to tell it, and to give it to other people. Because once again, I look at a group of people here in this room. All of our lives have been changed for so much good. Is that a true statement? Have your lives been changed? Do you feel the difference in your life from now until when you didn't have Christ? Because even though I grew up in the church, and I think a lot of us have, there was times in my life where my faith was low. There was times in my life where I doubted and where I stepped away from God and where I didn't trust Him as much as I need to. But I look at myself now in the way that I am devoted to my faith and the way that I want to show it to other people. My life is so much better. And what I want to do with that, I want to share that with other people. I want to make sure others have that same opportunity that I got. Because once again, they too were created by God. They too are a beautiful piece of art that God has created. Everybody matters. And what I like to remind everybody in my lessons is that all of you have been chosen by God. If you think you haven't, you're wrong. And if you are struggling to find your purpose and what good you can do in your life, seek help, because we're here. We can make this better, and we can do this together. I can't think of a better support system than what God has given us here. Look around you. We are all in this together. We're not a church who has separate parts. I don't want us to be that way. I don't want people to be here and never talk to each other. And I've seen that before, and it's sad. God has given us a huge blessing, each and every one of us, and I'm thankful that you guys are here. I'm thankful that you guys want to learn more, to show your light, and to help change the lives of other people. So I want to remind us, as both church and individual Christians, let's start living out our sole purpose in life. Remind yourself that your job, that your home, that your possessions, that your pastimes, that things you enjoy in life are not the reason you're here. We have to make a living, we have to provide for our families, and we have things to enjoy in this life. But the only reason we are here is because God has chosen us to be here to grow His kingdom. How special. I wouldn't want any other job. I wouldn't. The only job that I want is to grow the kingdom. And I would do that any way God leads me to do how. And we can do that in any aspect of our life. No matter what career we choose, no matter what friend group we have, no matter what family we're a part of, we have the opportunity to do that just as much as everybody else does. So, I have a note here, and that makes no sense. I just misspelled a word. Let's be ready to make disciples. I'm ready. I hope you are too. And once again, if you're struggling where you fit in, we'll show you. We'll help you. I want to help you. You can come to me anytime, seriously. Anytime you need me, I'm there. But I could say that for most people in this room, I think. And I hope all people in this room. If somebody calls you, if somebody texts you, if someone pulls you aside, hey, I need your help, be there for them. And if it's something that you think you can't, there's things in my life that I can't accomplish for other people. But with the diversity in this room, I'll lead you to somebody. I'll show you, hey, this person can help you, and I'll be right by to support you. So if you need anything, if you need any help in this journey, I want to remind you, go and make disciples. Don't be scared of it. Attack it and be passionate about it. And let's do that in our own lives, and let's also do that together. If you need anything this morning, please don't hesitate to ask. We're here for you. Let's stand and sing all together.